Welcome to New York Bio's Virtual Breakfast Series, a digital program started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Brandy Hauser and Jean-Loup Romett-Lemonne, founders of Traverse Biosciences.
All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of New York Bio's Virtual Breakfast Series. My name is Jennifer Hawks-Bland, and I'm the CEO at New York Bio. We're thrilled you're here with us today to hear from our esteemed guests from Traverse Biotech and a whole bunch of other amazing career stories that we're going to hear about today. Thank you to Moses and Singer for being our partner over the last 4 weeks and help us bring you amazing content and interesting discussions. We've actually somewhat intentionally, maybe partially unintentionally, had a real sort of international flavor as we rounded out the discussion around our emerging biotech company showcase that we did in partnership with the New York Stock Exchange and emerging European biotech companies. So today's discussion is a perfect exclamation point to that focus that we've had. And we look forward to hearing from Brandy and Jean-Loup. And I will kick it. I almost forgot. We've done this so often. The housekeeping. If you have questions, and I hope you do for our guests, please put them in the Q&A box or the chat. And Derek and I will get to them in the course of our conversation. With that, I will turn it over to Derek to kick our discussion off. Thanks.
All right. Good morning, Brandy, Jean-Loup. So great to have you here at the end of a long weekend. I've actually looked forward to having you both on for a long time. I find that, when we have guests on that have kind of spent the last, close to a decade in New York and has been as intimately involved in the startup ecosystem as both of you have, it's always a really terrifically fruitful discussion because there's been so much going on that has been kind of behind the scenes and behind the press releases. And it's just so great to have the perspective of people that we're kind of, heads down and building things with, which both of you have been. So it's wonderful to have you both here. We can kick it off with a bit of an origin story. And, Jean-Loup, why don't we start with you, because you've had this incredible career and, centered around, immunology, which I think for the past decade has just more or less been revolutionized with, what we understand about the immune system and the ability to harness it to make therapeutics.
Oh, thank you. And thank you very much for having us, today. And yeah, immunology, it's a long love story. I really fell in love with immunology at the medical school. I really was passionate with it. So, and then I was lucky enough to have my thesis, mentored by the person who discovered the first hepatitis B vaccine. So he asked me to follow the people that have been vaccinated, the first 100 people, and to analyze all their immune response and to see if it was protective. So I really started to swim in the middle of what the immune reaction is and what antibody could be raised and how they're protective and everything for hepatitis B. So that was really something. And then that's the work then moved to the collaboration at Harvard with the cancer biology department at the Harvard School of Public Health. And so we had a collaboration that led me to go over there for 5 years. I was supposed to go there for 15 days. So it's just to let you know how the future is very difficult to predict. And I was very lucky over there. And I really also was into immunology and cancer and virus-inducing cancer and how to build an immune response against some virus-inducing cancer can maybe protect against cancer. That was really the thing. So that, with it in mind, I decided to also move after Harvard to build my own company because in Boston in the 80s, what you wanted to do is to start a biotech. Mm-hmm. And so I started a biotech and I moved back to Europe to start it over there in France. And I started a cancer immunotherapy company in 1990 with cellular immunotherapy with activated macrophages and dendritic cells and then bispecific antibody to do like a CAR T cells with the activated, killer cells.
We just have to reiterate that this was 1990 in case someone jumps into the chat and wants to offer you like $100 million for the A round for this company now. Right?
Well, they can always send the money.
We can do it again. It's fine.
You'll take it.
It was a good idea then. It was a good idea now.
And then actually, I was lucky enough to have on my scientific advisory board, Carl June was on my scientific advisory board, the other, big names in the field. So it was a lot of fun. And then to make a long story short, I started alone, and then we had like 150 people, and we were supposed to reopen so I raised like 80 million in Europe, and then with VCs and everything. It was really, really interesting. And we signed a huge deal with Sanofi for 600 million, buzz dollars. And but it was a 35 investment inside the company. So they were, Sanofi was one of the major investors. The other big partner we had was Medarex. And it was very interesting because I started with Medarex when Medarex was 5 people there.
Yep.
So, and then we worked together with the scientific advisory board of Medarex, and then we have a strong collaboration. And then, the story of Medarex and the
well, Medarex made the first checkpoint inhibitors, right? So everybody that's deep into cancer immunotherapy at some point kind of reverts back to Medarex, right? Medarex usually pops up somewhere in the story. Don Drakeman and the team at that company, and that was one of the key. You have to kind of dig for it if you're just digging through press releases, but that was really one of the key companies for them that helped kind of lead us to where we are now.
Yeah, there was the first anti-CTLA-4, antibodies, and then the PD-1. So it's and then BMS, but Medarex. So now it's BMS antibodies. So that was really fun. And then we were supposed to reopen the Euronext at that time, because it was in 2004 at that time. And then so we were sort of a success story in Europe and in France, and we were supposed to reopen. We're sort of great. And then it was we didn't succeed to go into Euronext because we sold the book to the book was sold, but we needed 10% in France. And it was 0. So I decided to leave. I went to the States. So that's really also the story of why we will talk more at Traverse about it. It's so important to be transatlantic, actually, even more today than before. So I moved and I started, and then three mergers later, I had to do acquisition, merger, and all the story. And then I eventually went to the NASDAQ. There was a NASDAQ listed company. And our first product has been approved in Europe, and the company has been acquired by Takeda. So it was all that time cancer immunotherapy and everything, but it was before. It was bought in 2009. So that was even before the wave that we're in now. I don't remember exactly when Opdivo and Keytruda were approved, but I don't think we've had a full decade of them. Yeah. In 2010, for Dandreon was our competitor, direct competitor. So Dandreon has been approved, and then also the first results, with Steve Rosenberg doing the clinical trial with Medarex on melanoma. So it's how it was just 1 year too early that I've been acquired.
Yeah, it's funny, you trace the roots back, and inevitably you think about cell therapy, and you end up going back to Dendreon, which was really kind of this. It literally had a black box that they described, and they said the cells go in, something happens to them, and then they come out. And from Dendreon, you have Steve Harr, which you go through cell therapy, and now Steve Harr is head of Sana. I mean, it's really interesting how these certain nodes of this network just kind of all bring you back to the same places. And so, Brandy, we can go to you. And I think there's probably, not too many people that are kind of dyed in the wool company creators like you. You've done this out of academia. You've done this on multiple continents now. So why don't you give us a little bit of backstory, and then we'll kind of get into how the two of you started working together.
Yeah, no, happy to. So I guess I'll just start with my PhD. I was very lucky to have done my PhD with Jack Strominger. So continuing on the comments of immunology, who is a sort of, stronghold in the field, despite the fact that he, is a bit of a storied person. And from there, I was also quite lucky because during my time with Jack, I also had the great privilege to also interact with other people outside of academia. So a lot more business orientated individuals. And I would say that the most seminal person that I would sort of point to is Vicky Sato. And she gave incredible advice when I was a graduate student, and really sort of inspired me to think about something that was beyond just a traditional academic career. And I think that definitely when I was finishing my PhD, there was not, while it was still pretty persistent that you would go into academia, I think that it was becoming much more obvious that not every PhD was going to find a home that way. So starting to sort of broaden that landscape. And at the time, Cambridge, Massachusetts was slowly but surely becoming, the sort of mecca that it is now. But, those buildings, I was watching them get built. I was watching the companies go up. And so that was also a sort of, inspiring type of atmosphere to be a part of. And so I was, during that time, so I finished my PhD and I had the opportunity to go and work with Pfizer CTI, which at the time that happened, this was in 2011, that was a very innovative approach for a pharmaceutical company to actually take, right? So this is being headed by Tony Coyle, and Derek, I know you and I have talked about Tony, and it was just a really different time for Pfizer to be trying to do something that CTI is. It's now sort of morphed again.
I love the design of CTI. I thought the design of CTI was brilliant, and I think the way that they laid that out, I thought it was probably one of the better bridges between industry and academia that I've seen. And I think there were some challenges in terms of organizationally where it went, but when they started it, I thought it was super ambitious, and I thought it was really kind of the right way to go about industry academia collaborations. I thought it was great.
No, and it was a pretty impressive setup at the time. And I was working with Francis Toneguzzo, who was at the time the head of Partners RVL, which has now been completely renamed in all different ways, the Mass General Brigham. But anyway, it was a really fantastic opportunity. And I got to see firsthand the sort of trials around taking academic science into, we'll say, a biotech approach, or at least into early stage development. And it was, increasingly obvious the sort of different mechanisms by which we're all motivated, and by which academic science is specifically motivated, that is specifically different than how clinical science is motivated. And so realizing that during that time was pretty interesting. And I also had the great privilege to be looking over the shoulder of, Partners, sorry, it's not Partners anymore, but Mass General Brigham's entire technology portfolio, to try to find things for Pfizer. And so it was a pretty massive portfolio. So there's a lot of great science and trying to understand that. So I think that it was a really lucky opportunity to have seen all the things that can go wrong and some of the things that can go right.
Yep.
During that time. And so that, for personal reasons, I decided to flee the country, which was very exciting and wonderful. And so I went to Australia, and I worked for an organization called Brandy Capital Partners. And so I think it gave me a really unique perspective, right? So now I'm outside of the country, which is great, working with people who are very smart, very differentially educated. I think they're coming from different types of universities, and they have very much have spent their careers looking in to the US and looking in specifically at Boston. And so I think that this gave me a unique perspective that most Americans don't have. And also, interestingly, in Australia, there's different conflict of interest policies that occur at the university level than we experience here in the US. And so it is absolutely possible to start a company off of an academic's bench. And this is something that is not truly possible here. There's a lot of rules and regulations specifically around tech transfer and the sort of Basel Act that sort of implies different types of things that have to happen. And that does not exist there. So it was a pretty exciting time. So I not only got to see how early stage financing can be successfully deployed, but I also had the great opportunity to work with the developers directly. So that was an opportunity where they had designed their office such that CEOs of their portfolio companies sat inside with their investors. And so I got to really interact across the entire portfolio in a real development orientated way. So that was a fantastic time. And it was really nice to live in Australia.
It's one of the nice things about being outside of a system for a while. It gives you appreciation of nuance, right? You know, if you invest in biotech companies in Europe, if you start biotech companies here, if you do things in Australia, you get perspective of kind of, you know, it doesn't have to be the same everywhere, and you get some of the advantages and disadvantages of why we do it the way that we do it. That also lets you look at things a little bit differently, because you get the understanding that it is in fact possible for things to work in a system that is not quite exactly the same as the one that we have now.
I think it's also, and before we go on, because I think it'll be really important for Traverse. I mean, similar, well, I mean, not that I have any sort of career backdrop as Jean-Loup, but just as a perspective, right? I had the opportunity to gain that additional perspective of being an outsider looking in. And it's definitely different than being here on the ground. So I think that was one of the sort of major things that you'll see come through in Traverse. So go ahead, Derek.
And you came back to do Celdara, correct?
Yeah, so I had been working with Jake Rader, who's the CEO at Celdara, before I had left through my relationship at Partners. He was a very interesting model, and through Jake, I had the opportunity to meet Mike Fanger. We've talked a little bit about Metarex, but Mike Fanger is really the sort of, I don't know, the spear in the ground, the scientist that started it all. And he's a really incredible human being. And him and Jake had created the Celdara model, which I think is extremely unique and continues to be unique in the ecosystem today. And this was just, you know, understanding the perspective that all early stage assets, you know, have a huge amount of risk. And one way that you can mitigate that risk through financial mechanisms is to use non-dilutive cash to just inch them along a little bit. And that was the concept around Celdara. And they were really successful just around the time that I came with developing a cellular therapy that now has been purchased by Celyad. And so they, you know, similar overlapping now is going back to the roots of immunology, kind of leaving the investment world and sort of, you know, nesting into how do you create these, you know, startup portfolio type assets and move them along using non-dilutive financing. And it's also the opportunity that I got to meet Jean-Loup. So
well, it's a strategy that really kind of sounds great on paper, and people can espouse it all they want. Very few people can do it well. And honestly, I've seen very few places have the success that you and your team have had in doing it. It's extremely hard to get a single, you know, SBIR grant or any sort of non-dilutive funding. It's incredibly difficult to do that in a serial fashion and to keep moving things ahead. So I mean, the amount of work and progress that you guys have made over the past few years is incredible, right? And you know, we talk a lot about venture capital and things, but again, it's like the Australia Europe question, right? There are many ways to advance an asset. There are many ways to start a company, and you know, in a lot of ways, I think one of the things that does is it gives you a very kind of visceral appreciation for really the serial nature of innovation in a lot of ways. Like, you have to absolutely, you know, grind on one thing at a time. You don't have this broad vision and someone gives you a large check and you go off and execute for a while. You have to really have this kind of stepwise execution mentality.
I think it also forces you to be an excellent scientist, right? And the scientists that, you know, it's not just me, right? It's a whole team of really top tier individuals that we're working with. And so it really forces you to think pretty critically about the experiments that you're doing and what they will lead you to. So is this a value inflecting experiment? Is it necessary? It also really forces you, and I think this will come back to Traverse, it forces you to think about things that are really expensive, that are difficult to get financed. So one of the things from non-dilution is that for whatever reason, the NIH does not seem to value manufacturing. It's very unclear to me why this is not valued, because it's super important. And I can't tell you how many manufacturing grants I have written and not gotten funded because no one cares. And I specifically had reviewer comments come back and say, oh, it's not innovative. And I was like, well, I sure hope not. It's manufacturing, right? So it's an interesting sort of pathway. So it helps really teach you how to develop things in the most efficient way, and to be extremely critical about, you know, actually taking that early stage science and transitioning it into development, a technical development pathway. So,
yeah. So how did the two of you meet?
So I think I should say, again, it was Metarex was at the center because, you know, we were talking about Mike Fanger, who was the founder of Metarex, and he was also with Carl June on my scientific advisory board. So we had a relationship for like 20 years at my company, and then at Metarex too. So it was sort of and then when my company has been acquired, he was asking me to join John Seldara. He said, "Why you don't come and work with us?" And then he asked me. In between, I worked, you know, at BioBusiness TV. It was like a break between. I said, "Okay, why I don't do something else?" And I had to be in New York because my wife said it's New York or nothing. So.
You're not the first person that I've heard from that too. I mean, I think there are so many reasons to come and do biotech in New York, but also there's an offshoot of those reasons where people say, "Well, I'm in New York because my significant other said this is where we're going to live."
Yeah,
it's also a selling point for that.
Exactly.
I mean, I suppose I fit into that category too when it comes down to it.
Huh.
So, BioBusiness TV, you basically, you know, you had the idea for this program before we did. So, thank you.
So no, actually, that's why I really appreciate what you're doing, and I'm very admirative, and I really thank you. I think it's great. Yeah, at that time it was more like being a CEO of a listed company on NASDAQ. When you're interviewed, when you have to give a pitch or something, you always have your lawyers reviewing your slide before. So it's not at all about the science, not all about anything. It's just about, Reg FD, and then not to release something. So at the end, you don't say anything, or they all say the same thing. It's just boring. So, and I said, why we don't do something else? So with this BioBusiness TV, I was picking and choosing who I wanted to invite, and then it was, so how much will it cost to be, because it was a partnership with the NASDAQ market side. And then I said, no, it's not, it's my privilege as an editor to, to invite you. And I said, oh, great. So then it was coming, and I said, the rules will be, I will be interviewed by an analyst of Wall Street who knows very well the field, and you won't know the questions before. Oh, really? So, yes, this is how to get some fresh content. And it was so fun because sometimes you can see the face. The guy was very good. So it was really, it was very funny. But then I was not making any money. Of course, it was with, when you sell, when you sell a company, you have some, you're happy with the money. But it was a good way to spend my money. And, but we were doing also some series on stem cells and everything. It was, I was with a group of, especially with Jonathan Tepper, who was a very brilliant young guy, and he was fantastic. It was really him and me. And then we were hiring the team when we were shooting or something. It was a lot of fun. But at one point I said, okay, now I have to go back to work.
Yeah.
and then Mike Fanger said, okay, Jean-Louis, why you don't, we just hired a young and brilliant person, called Brandy. I said, why you don't go there, and be, check with her and how things are going. And so that's what I did. I started to be a consulting for them and working with Brandy. And I've been impressed from the first day. And I really said, okay. And then we realized that maybe we have something else that we can do. That would be the adventure of Traverse Biotech coming.
So how did you decide to focus on European, right? So you're here, New York is starting, right, to build. How did you decide that was the niche that Traverse could best serve?
So maybe I will shoot first, Brandy, and you will add things. Because, when I had to move my company from France to the States, and you have to do it alone. So you have to find a space and everything, and you have to then be visible. And what's something that we don't realize when you're in the States, but when you're over there in Europe, people in the States don't know at all what's going on over there. It's like a different planet. And then if you arrive and say, oh, person company, who are you? What are you doing? Oh, okay. So, and then most of the time, okay, with the accent and with everything, you don't understand what the other is saying. And it's very difficult. So, and then it's a distraction because you have to run your company.
Mhm.
And the thing is also, you're always under financed. You know, when we were talking here
Yeah.
at New York Bio about the last time about the round A when you invited these other companies, it's very rare to have a first round of financing, your A round, for more than 5 or 10 million euros.
Yeah.
And then you may have maybe a second one if you're very lucky. So you will have a second one, but the B round will be maybe 15. So what can you do with this? It's very, very difficult. And then even for the investors, I'm also at the board of some investment fund in Europe, and I understand very much why, because if you want to get your money back when you invested in a B round, it's very difficult. Because on Euronext, if the company is one exit is Euronext, the volume on Euronext is not at all the same than on the Nasdaq.
Right.
So you cannot exit. So it's really, it's not, the science is very good, but being under under finance, they really need to move to the States and start building two sides and to be known in the States and without being distracted by doing it, because it's a huge distraction. And believe me, when I had to do 3 mergers and then finally being on a Nasdaq, and so it's really it's a huge distraction for your business.
Well, it's interesting. We've become almost numb to sticker shock in biotech, right? The elevation of round sizes of everything else really has become normal, right? So I think there's this strange phenomenon where people don't write $5 million checks all that much anymore, which is why it's one of the reasons that I really think what you're doing at Traverse is incredibly interesting and probably really, really well timed for the market. So we've mentioned the name of the company a couple of times. So before we actually get into the formation of it, Brandy, why don't you talk a little bit about what Traverse was formed to do and like kind of the raison d'etre and the operating model, and then we'll go from there, because I think it would help everybody to understand exactly what you're doing when we keep mentioning it, and then we'll kind of circle around, because I also love the way the company was founded.
Yeah, I think that the other thing to just complement what Jean-Loup was talking about, right? There was this perspective of ex-US, right? Looking in, knowing that the volume isn't there, that you're not going to be able to get that investor return. And so therefore there's going to be a halt in development, right? Largely clinical development, but it doesn't deny the fact that there's excellent scientific institutions and really, elite level biotech companies that are based in Europe, and not just in Europe, but, internationally. So we want to make sure that that's expanded beyond. But the other thing that was happening
data doesn't care what country it was created in, right? Data is
exactly.
Data.
Data is data. And I think that the other thing that was happening, and Derek, we've talked over the years about the New York ecosystem, is that, we were really sitting here and we were seeing it kind of happen over time. What's going on in the New York ecosystem? What do we need? What are we missing? And I think that what was going on, at least, this was probably circa like 2015, 2016, where everyone kept looking to Boston, and they were looking for those big A rounds and saying, oh, we want to do the 20 million. And Deerfield and Versant and other organizations have moved in to New York and are doing things like that. But we have a huge financial sector, and they want to invest, and we're seeing them really lay down a lot of money around tech. And you're like, well, what are they doing in tech? And what is fintech ? Question mark for all the biotech people, right? And they're really like putting money towards it. And we were like, oh, this is really kind of interesting, and looking at that, and then also looking at the fact that New York has elite level institutions scientifically. Like, we're talking about a little tiny island has all of these excellent scientific universities and people and talent, and we weren't seeing creation here, right? And over time, I think that it is getting better, and we are seeing it. I think Accelerate came in, and Alexandria is investing, and everyone's chipping away at the block. But it was, I think, as we were kind of rolling along, there was a couple of things that we weren't seeing, which were, where's all our talent pool? And one of the things that we did through Soldaris, we created a fellowship program. And this kind of harks to the foundation and why we kind of wanted to move forward with a foundation that we thought would be relevant for New York City. Is it, I have done nothing but see really talented scientists come out and apply for this fellowship program. And then I can tell you that they're, you know, on the first flight to California or the first train to Boston for their first job. They're not staying in New York. And this is just devastating to me. I'm putting in blood, sweat, and tears. I'm not getting paid extra to train these guys. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're gonna leave me. And so this is pretty hard for me to kind of see. And so we were looking at how do we maintain talent here, and also how do we build here, right? We're going to look different than Boston, and I think that's great. We're going to look different than California. That's great. So what is it that we're going to look like? And really getting more involved with the financial sector. And so when you partner that with what Jean-Loup was talking about, where there's this need for liquidity and volume outside of the United States, but there's good science, you know, you can now look to see there's this gap. So can we actually bridge that gap? And that's where the name came from, right? Traverse, we're literally traversing. And so that was where it is. From an operational standpoint, I think that the way that it functions is pretty unique. And so what we are doing is we're actually working with biotech companies or biopharma companies. These are established organizations. Most of them are actually listed organizations on the Euronext. And what we are doing is we're working with preclinical derived assets that are in their portfolio. And because of this liquidity issue, they have selected not to continue to advance these assets into clinical application. And I really want to press on the fact that these assets there's nothing wrong with them. These are assets that are very much out licensable. They don't typically out license them because they actually want them. And so that's a really important thing to highlight, is that these are wanted assets as a part of a company's portfolio, but they do not have the financial liquidity to be able to advance it, and they can't seek the investment structure that they would need to be able to advance multiple assets. So we provide a shared equity model where they can bring that asset over into the United States. We drop them into US-based SPVs, and we allow them to be individually financed. And so what this now looks like is a tech investment or a single asset vehicle investment structure. And so this allows for the New York financial ecosystem to be able to participate in a way that the biotech ecosystem doesn't have to. So you don't need your sort of strongholds in venture capital to be their financiers. The other thing that it comes with is the expertise of Jean-Loup and myself, and mostly Jean-Loup. And I think that the other thing
you need to give yourself more credit. You need to give yourself
Well,
it comes with us both, and it also comes with the biotech company in a partnership fashion. So not in a negative way. I think some investors will look at it and say, oh, we're giving up our upside. But I think that the only thing you're giving up is the entire development team that got it to the position that that asset is already in. And so we're taking that development team with us. And so what that's doing is it's creating an organization that's much larger than just the two of us, but it's keeping the structure quite lean. The other thing to say about these assets, which I think is really, really important, is that they all have predecessors that are in clinical application, which means two things. One, they can get through regulatory, they can go into humans, and they don't have a toxicity signal, which is fantastic. The other thing is, which is quite close to my heart, is that they can be manufactured. So a lot of questions around delivery and manufacturability and toxicity, all of that is completely mitigated despite the fact that these are earlier assets. So they require less intensive capital. There's a greater return on investment from an investment standpoint. And all of these assets are just coming with a cohort of really top flight developers attached to them, scientists and sort of technical teams with them. So we think that this is a really unique model. We think that it's going to provide an opportunity for individuals, first in Europe is our focus, but of course we just think internationally focused. It's going to provide an opportunity to bring great science that's undervalued into the US ecosystem and specifically into New York. And with it will come management talent and expertise that will allow for the continual growth of the New York ecosystem, which is close to all of us, right? I think we all think about this. So
when you have, I guess when you are in a semi-cash constrained position as a biotech company, you have to make hard choices, right? And most of the time, you have either your lead asset or whatever is number one or number two in your portfolio, and there are other pieces of science that that you really like. There's scientists that will bang their fist on the table to develop them, but sometimes financially it just doesn't work. So these assets are actually available. And from what you're talking about, do you also have the company has a buyback provision, right? So if it is something that they genuinely like, there's at least an option to acquire it back, right? So it's really interesting. I mean, you talk about the model like that. It's really not that different to what Celgene's BD team was doing throughout much of the 2000s, right? So Celgene's BD team would do equity heavy deals with these startup companies with the option to acquire at the end. And from a financial standpoint, it gives the investor maybe not certainty, but it gives the investor a vision to what they could have in the future. You understand the steps to get there, and it's not kind of a pie in the sky type of investment. It's actually really structured. It's not that different from a tech investor. I think one of the tenets of investing in tech is in a lot of ways you can count progress, right? If you have an app, if you have anything like that, you can count impressions, eyeballs, users, etc. It's a much more kind of linear way to demonstrate value. This is really not all that different because you have these very discrete steps that are in a much shorter time frame, and one potential deal at the end is actually already there and on the table. So it makes a ton of sense, especially when dealing with say investors that may not be completely biotech, but would kind of bleed into biotech and looking for ways to access that market. That's really, really smart.
And I think definitely post-COVID, and Jean-Loup, I want you to say stuff, but definitely post-COVID, where I think that investors, the investor community that's external to your professional investor community, are looking to biotech because they're seeing the returns and they're saying, hey, this could be a relevant vehicle for us to be sinking cash, but they don't have technical expertise to do it. And so that's something that, we think that this type of vehicle provides a lot of advantages to, and I think it makes a lot of sense in the New York ecosystem, right? So, I mean, you do have an enormous amount of professional investors in the Boston ecosystem or in California, but not here, right? They're just a little bit sparser.
Well, like you said, I think, go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, I was just gonna say, thinking about the flow of, we'll call it, individual investors and everything, just look at the amount and how quickly some of the large biotech funds have been put together over the last year and how quickly they were oversubscribed. I mean, that tells you that, and I think one reason, among a whole bunch, is the fact that everyone has been talking about discovery and development around COVID vaccines, right? It's now in this, your standard lexicon for everyone else. and I think that's a good thing, right? It makes us more aware of potential vehicles to put money into. But I also think that I think that the risk, right, is when you have retail investors that, that don't understand the risk that biotech bears. I think that could also be dangerous if the pendulum swings.
I think one of the things that if I had a nickel for every single time over the last 5 to 10 years that someone said that they were going to basically put together a product for family offices to invest in, I'd have at least $3, right? So but I think one of the things that you're doing here is you're making things more accessible, right? You're actually eliminating most of kind of the big major questions that investors or funds that very often can take a long time to get to what eventually may be a no, right? It doesn't necessarily always fit in their risk profile. You take a lot of the big questions off the table. And really, when we think about it, that's one way to bring new and different kinds of capital into biotech, right? It's not necessarily you don't have to necessarily convince someone of the promise of a Moderna when it's still written on a napkin and it's one person with this, because from a family office standpoint, you're never going to get there. Now you have people that for a long time have actually at least started to invest in biotech and know what they're doing, but you've actually taken off a lot of kind of the big questions or the big challenges that they've seen in the past that would actually halt them from getting to yes. So as much as my $3 of people who would like to revolutionize family office investing, I think this is really interesting, and I think there's going to be more kind of products like this that actually do bring that sector in, because we do have this enormous sector. There's a ton of capital available, And I think the more offshoots and inroads that we have to get some of that capital into biotech, I think the industry is going to be healthier for it.
Mm-hmm. I think that the other thing, yeah, I mean, talk about risk mitigation. I mean, not only are we mitigating it across the sort of major technical development barriers that most people encounter when you start out with just a sort of concept or an idea, but I think that we're also just mitigating risk by, Jean-Loup and I are actually acting as the operators, starting with it, which I think is a little bit different than when you're starting out. I would say like a traditional biotech where you just have an idea and maybe you're a really excellent scientist. I see this a lot with the academics that I work with. They're unbelievable scientists, right? But how to get from point A to point D is that's not what they do. And to be quite honest, they're largely not interested in that. They just want somebody else to do that for them, and that they can answer questions along the way. And so I think having the sort of operator experience or capacity attached to these type of assets that are already heavily de-risked really allows for we'll say alternative financing to come in and be able to seed that investment and to find it valuable, right? To actually get a return on investment that I think is meaningful.
Well, one of the nice parts about operating expertise is you've seen it before, right? This isn't for you guys. It may be, we may be talking about this like this is a new model, but this isn't really. You're not doing anything terribly new, right? Both of you have actually, done exactly this for a long time. So Jean-Loup, why don't you go ahead? You were just about to jump in.
No, I wanted to add something about it's also with the motivation of what we are doing. We are not advertising outside, but say, who has a good product to give us? We are not. We are doing our own screening, the way we are scouting, and then we are selecting really the one based on very strong, science and excellent management that we can work with, because it's for each product that we are taking, it's a partnership. Okay, we get the license to it, but then we will work with the steering committee and everything for each one. So, and then also we are thinking about the patients. And then, when I think about my company, it took 17 years to have my first product on the, big in the market. So that's I cannot wait 17 years again.
Right.
So, I have to be realistic. Maybe Brandy can, but that's why we're doing a good team. But I said, okay, why we are not helping some product we strongly believe it's fitting a real medical need, and then the patients are expecting something coming in, and then so we can maybe give a push and on the right direction. So we are really selective. And then Brandy, what I learned working with Brandy is how important the due diligence is. And she, I never met anyone like her to be so stringent, on it. So I think it's we have a process of selecting the project we are taking, and then at the end, the company we are approaching, say, okay, this is what we are doing. We have selected you, so it's different. It's not the blind dates.
Right.
We know why we want to work with them, and we love the technology and everything. So initially it's with our network and knowing, and then we have much more than we can handle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you that. And do you have that was one of my next questions is on the sourcing, which it sounds like it's robust, but it's very intentional. And do you look for companies to partner with and to take those assets that you already know the leadership team, or is it the science? What is that one factor that makes it into your maybe column for due diligence?
It's all what you're saying, and then it's really because we will be in the same boat for quite some time, and we will be their U.S. partner, let's say, for building something in the U.S. with their technology. So it has to be people that we want to go on vacation on the same safari together or the same plane. So it's they have to be very good management. They have to be well financed, because we don't want that the company will just be on Chapter 11 the next day or something. So it's a many criteria, and then they are very well respected management, and the science has to be top of the top, because from my expertise for all these years, the science has to be, that's the first thing I said to my scientific the CEO, the CSO I recruited was a guy at Pasteur Institute, sort of the star over there. And I said, well, if you come to my company, what I want you to publish more on a better journal. I want you to organize, conferences and things. And we were organizing the international conferences on immunomonitoring, because immunomonitoring was essential to know what we were doing with our dendritic cells, cancer vaccines, and everything. Right. What are we testing? The microenvironment of the tumor and everything. And people were coming from all around the world for things. And so, you're a company, but you have to really be with the top scientists. If my scientific advisory board, I was talking about Carl June and Mike Fenger and many, other big names. That's what you need to have. So it's we are very demanding.
I think that the other thing, which is a little bit different than your question, Jennifer, but the other thing that we think about with Traverse is that these are real assets, right? So different than the pie in the sky. I can be the next Moderna sort of idea. These are real assets, but what they really offer in terms of the New York ecosystem, especially with the academic institutions, is that there's a potential exit strategy for academic assets earlier in their development. So we're seeing now a lot of assets that are, very interesting. Maybe they take 1 or 2 or 3 steps in terms of their proof of concept, but then where do they go? And I think that Jean-Loup and I see this really a lot with a company like Saldar, right? Is that we inch things along, but then they're not ready for pharma, but getting them financed, that that last 5 million of manufacturing that literally nobody wants to give me money for. What do you do with them? And these are potentially really good assets, right? And so we think that Traverse could be a model that reflects, I don't want to say it looks similar to, but it reflects something what Third Rock originally did, where there's a lead asset and there's the capacity to do company formation with an actual clinical lead that can then pull along those academic ideas behind it that now become investable. And I think that this is a way that really builds the ecosystem and builds the strength of biotech within the ecosystem, because it's not just hoping and waiting for that 50 million pie in the sky. You're actually dealing in real assets, real financing, and real development. And so what, I think that goes hand in hand with what Jean-Loup had originally said, which is, we're looking to be in clinical application with each asset in 2 to 3 years. And that's really meaningful. I mean, that's meaningful to be, I don't know. I think I've been working with such early stage assets for so long. I'm looking forward to the first opportunity to go into clinic and to actually help people, as opposed to telling the NIH all the time that I'm going to help people one day. And so it's a really exciting prospect to be able to really impact people's lives. So we think that this model sort of bridges all of these gaps.
We had a good question from the audience, which is kind of just one aspect of what you're doing here. And it says, are you concerned that if there's a buyback option that it limits your upside, right? Or do you just basically structure the buyback at a point where it's, well, this is a good return for us on this anyway, and we're happy with the return that we get if it buys it back? So how do you think about that?
So maybe I start, Brandy.
Yeah.
I think it's a very good question. That's a question. Oops.
You're okay. You're still on.
You're okay. We can hear you.
Okay. I don't know. My screen. So yes, I'm back. So that's why we are limiting. It's not the buyback for sure. It's an option, the first right of negotiation at the time of the IND.
Commercialization, right? So it's
Maybe Brandy, you can add something here.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that this is a common concern that investors have, where they say, okay, if I'm going to seed you with $20 million, I don't want to, basically sell it for 1x or 2x or something like that at a later, a slightly earlier stage. They want to see that, we can grow it to $1 billion. And so we really appreciate that. So yes, we created this right of first negotiation, which is a little bit different than a true sort of buyback. So they can call the asset, but it's not guaranteed. They do have to negotiate for the asset at a market value. and it expires. So it only comes up at the IND filing, and it will expire if they don't actually capitalize on that opportunity.
Right.
Now there's
And
other
they still have
mechanisms
equity in the program and things.
That's
So
right.
there's always that. So we had another quick question as a follow-up, which I think you mentioned, but just for edification, you want to do this with multiple assets, right? You can create these kind of multiple SPVs under you, and it's really almost like the company is a development platform, right? You've got a good team, you've got all of the connectivity necessary to do it, and you can do this over and over again. And it's interesting, right? You look back at you look at that kind of structure, which might have been novel 10 years ago, but you have Nimbus and those kind of folks that have done the thing where they create the SPVs under the program, under the larger company, and it makes it much easier from kind of an asset development standpoint to do things very seriously in a really kind of stepwise fashion.
Derek, was there a question?
Thanks, Brandy.
Sorry, I was like waiting for the question.
Yeah, I know. I realized I trailed off there, and I figured you might run with it. Listen. So Jean-Loup said before that he liked Brandy immediately the first day that he met her, and I did too, because literally the first time that I met Brandy, I forget exactly what program or something that we were talking about, but Brandy knew every single angle of this, and it wasn't even something she was working on. It was an external program she was thinking of licensing, and literally our entire conversation about how it was overpriced and they didn't understand what all of the things wrong with it was. And it wasn't a 5-minute conversation, it was probably 15-20 minutes. She knew the ins and outs of every single thing that she was talking about. So yeah, suffice to say, I also liked you immediately. But yes, no, that wasn't a terribly good question on my side. I apologize.
That's
okay. So what's next? Where are you in the formation process, and where do you kind of hope to be with it in a year?
Oh geez, go ahead, Jean-Loup.
Oh, I think we tested first with the company if we could get some assets this way, if it was attractive for them, and the reception was very good. We moved it took us like 6 months to get some contracts, and then now to have contract signed and everything. So now we are on exploring the different way of financing it, whether because we said it's SPV, so that's very good. And I think it's interesting. Initially, we were targeting really the family offices, which is in New York. You have a lot of family offices.
Yep.
Exactly what you said before. And you have some huge family offices that they are well structured and everything, but some others, and most of them are not, and they are and how it's to provide an opportunity to invest in some de-risk product. And then by investing in an SPV, it's for regular venture capitalists, they don't like it. They want the platform. They want it's not the same type. Yeah. So we thought that that could be also interesting, because you may have an impact. You can really see the impact of your investment in a very short time. It's not like waiting for 20 years to maybe see finally the product doing something in what happened in your family, and then you want to invest and to have a new treatment. So we thought that could be interesting. So the SPV is one way, but also we got some feedback. We are now meeting with some very famous gurus of biotech, and to give us advice. And some said, oh, what you have as a whole is a fantastic for a SPAC.
Right.
So
that was fantastic for a SPAC.
Yeah.
Right.
So we said, well, you should, or go right, because you have a portfolio. Each product is de-risk, and the technology is really interesting. And it's you don't, if one product fail, but you have the other ones, they don't impact each other in terms of risk. So they said, and they're already some are already in very advanced in clinic or being in clinic, and even we have one product that it's already in clinic. It's a new formulation of the product. So it's said this is then your sourcing, you can really get a deal flow. It's not an endless deal flow. So for the SPAC is something. So we are exploring everything. It's not what we thought initially, but the SPAC, because it's maybe we'll ask a different structure of Traverse. So,
Right.
but we are ready to listen to all the good advice. And what you have, what I learned also with my experience is you have to adapt to the market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
you
it's
cannot-
interesting, right? I
It's not the opposite.
this is a new, SPACs are a new tool in the financing toolbox, and I think for at least the first wave of whatever people have done on the SPAC market, it's kind of conformed to, well, this company would go public otherwise, and this is kind of a different way to do that. You have these SPAC vehicles now searching for deals. From your perspective, this is something that is perhaps not something that looks like a traditional IPO now, but certainly from a SPAC perspective, if you just think about it in terms of the public markets, you're right, it does have something it's more projectable. You do have the ability to build a platform and to build a portfolio. So it makes a lot of sense to think about that from a strategic standpoint. So if we have, I don't know if we have anyone in the chat or on these things with a SPAC. We've never actually closed a SPAC deal on the program before, but we're open to doing that. We did have one other quick.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure. We can do that. Like you said, you have to be adaptable, and if that's what we do, we can do that too. We did have a quick question about internal R&D and SBIR and other sorts of grants. So do you guys look at those kind of funding sources for these assets as well, or is it strictly much more of an kind of equity cash outlay for this? Do you do that on a program by program basis, or are you looking mainly for kind of straight equity capital that you can just deploy?
Brandy?
We can always do SBIRs. I think that the best, free money is not something to sort of shy away from, right? And so we know how to do this, and we can certainly deploy that on a per asset basis. And especially with the larger grants, if you're able to get them, they're upwards of $2 or $3 million. And so it's significant. It helps you sort of differentiate. It could help you bring in earlier stage assets to start to develop that portfolio. And we also think that it's really important to, especially from the New York ecosystem perspective, to continue to maintain relationships with academic institutions. We really think that, by sort of creating that nest with the academic institutions, that we're really going to build something that's prolific and sort of there's longevity for it. So yes, we absolutely do consider continuing with SBIR mechanisms, but we won't be reliant on them, I guess, is the best way to sort of think about it.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of relationships with the academic institutions, you've both spent a very long time cultivating what I think is a really deep level of appreciation from everyone else within the ecosystem. There's a ton of people here that look up to you, and I think there's just an incredible amount of respect in and around the city for all the things that you do. This was really exciting to talk to you this morning. I absolutely love what you're doing. And Jean-Loup, I think you nailed it, right? You have to be adaptable. And this is something that is, it's slightly different, but it makes a ton of sense from a development standpoint. And ultimately, we think about how do we get innovative medicines to patients. So, I love what you guys have done here. I think it's really exciting and something that could move a lot of innovations forward. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody else, hope you have a wonderful day and a great rest of the week.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Darius. Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for having us.
We had a great time. Thanks.
This is wonderful. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on New York Bio, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.